Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital. So, with me today is Mr. Bradley Tusk from Tusk Holdings. Hi, Bradley. How are you doing?
Hey, Sydney, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So, really excited to have you on today and would love to talk about your company and what you guys invest in. So, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you come to found Tusk.
Yeah, sure. So my background originally is in government and politics. So I was Mike Bloomberg's campaign manager. He ran for mayor of New York. I was the deputy governor of Illinois for 4 years, was Chuck Schumer's communications director in the U.S. Senate, and pivoted to tech by running the campaigns all over the U.S. to legalize Uber and ride sharing. Repeated the process with Clear to get them to airports, and it finally dawned on me that there was a broader nexus between technology and politics, and I'd understood and met my partner Jordan Nuff. At the time, he was running Blackstone's internal venture fund. And the question we asked each other was, if you really understand regulatory risk and you can do something about it, would that make you a better venture investor? And our thesis was yes, we hope so. And went out and raised our first fund in 2016, a small fund, 35 million. And in many ways, like every early stage venture fund, looking at the founder, the TAM, the underlying tech and idea, but we asked two questions that are specific to us. First, is there a gating regulatory issue or opportunity that, if it were solved, can really drive growth and valuation? And if so, can we solve it? So, for example, in that first fund, we invested in FanDuel. We ran all the campaigns to legalize daily fantasy sports betting. We invested in Lemonade. We got them their insurance licenses. We invested in Roman. We legalized subscription via text. Invested in Circle, Coinbase, Bird, a whole bunch of other companies. Fund two, we raised in 2019, doubled the fund size to $70 million, started leading deals and rounds. Fund three's 2021 vintage, doubled again to 140 million, also raised a breakout fund. And we mainly lead most of the deals that we do now, a lot in digital health, gaming, transportation, all regulated things.
That is awesome. And being that from the background that you have and in the space that you're in, do you feel that other co-investors, other VC funds have been coming to you to ask for your expertise
Yeah,
in?
I mean, in two ways. Sometimes people just come to me and say, "Hey, what do you think of this issue?" Or
Okay.
just because they want an opinion, and I'm always happy to give it. But oftentimes, yeah, we just get brought into deals a lot because we're able to just bring something to the table that other funds can't do. And my pitch to founders is pretty simple, which is, look, this is assuming they're going to be regulated in some way. Just based on my decades in politics, I know you're going to have this problem, this problem, this problem, and this problem. So you have two ways to approach it. One is you could hire a bunch of lobbyists and PR firms and everything else and spend seven figures and hopefully succeed. Or I can give you 5 million bucks and do it for free. As
Mm.
you can imagine, people tend to like that. So we win most
It's
of
a
the
good
time.
sell. Yeah. In terms of your time in politics, was the ride sharing one of the first things that, you kind of sank your teeth into startup wise that came
Yeah.
to break such barriers? How
Yeah.
did you kind of process that in your mind and your training and your background being like, what am I to do here? So kind of what was your
Yeah,
process
sure. So
like?
I after the Bloomberg campaign in '09, I opened up a political consulting firm, and I'm sitting in a Walmart meeting in early 2011, and a friend of mine called and said, "Hey, there's a guy with a small transportation startup. He's having some regulatory problems. Would you mind talking to him?" I become Uber's first political advisor that day. I get really lucky when Travis calls me back and says, "Listen, I can't afford your fee. Would you take equity?" I didn't even know what equity meant at the time, but thank God I said yes. And then started figuring this all out. And where in two ways it actually felt more natural than you think. First off, startups and political campaigns have a lot. It tends to be a lot of young people excited about an idea,
Mm.
working really hard to move something forward. In the startup, it's the product. In the campaign, it's the candidate. And you're working towards a specific outcome. For the campaign, it's the election. For the startup, it's the exit. But either way, a lot of the energy and vibe and mentality is actually pretty similar. So over the years, as I've been hiring more and more people out of politics to work with us, I keep saying it sounds confusing, but it's actually going to feel pretty familiar. And that's usually the case. And the second thing is, I really took one thing away from all of my years in politics and government, and it's that every policy output is the result of a political input. Every politician makes every decision solely based on the reelection and nothing else. And if you want them to do something that you need them to do, they have to either think that you can help them win their next election or that not helping you can cost them their next election. And Uber, in many ways, was the perfect example of that, where we were this tiny little startup at the time, but people hated the taxi system in whatever city they lived in. And we would come into a city, they would tell us go away, we would ignore them, we'd build up a customer base, then they would take us to court or in some way try to regulate us and crack down on us. And we would say to our customers, look, if you like this thing that we are offering you, we need you to fight for it. And here's who the relevant elected officials are. Here are the city council members, the mayor, the governor, whoever was relevant in that case. We made it easy to reach them through the app. And millions of people over a couple of years were willing to advocate on our behalf. And it changed the underlying political inputs. So you're a city councilman in Tulsa, Oklahoma. All things being equal, the taxi owners give you a couple $1,000s every campaign. You do what they want because you want a couple of grand. All of a sudden, I just had 5,000 people from your district tweet, text, call, email, all say, hey, I like this thing. Leave it alone. I'm going to be upset if you take it away. All of a sudden, that has a lot more significance than the couple of $1,000s in campaign contributions. We changed the underlying input, and that changed the underlying output, which was legalization in every market.
Yeah, that's a huge feat for sure. How would you have felt if it didn't go that way?
I wonder if I would have kept going in.
Would you? That's what I was.
Right?
I mean, that's
because
the real part of it.
it wasn't like I started my consulting firm with any sense that I would end up focusing on tech and early stage tech.
Right.
But Uber was really exciting, and because most of my fee was in equity, the value of it took off pretty quickly. And then Clear reached out to me, and I just did the same deal, took equity again, and they, I didn't succeed at the level of Uber, but also ended up being a really great outcome.
Absolutely.
And that's when I started to think like, okay, there's something here, and rather than competing with every political consultant in New York and Washington and everywhere else for the same stuff, what if first it was like, what if I just focus more on early stage tech companies that they don't know anything about politics, most people in politics know nothing about them. And then it was like, what if I could raise outside capital and actually invest in these companies?
Right.
And none of it was easy, but as you know from talking to doing this yourself and talking to founders and VCs all the time, you just kind of persevere and you get there, and it kind of grows from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess when you were doing all the regulatory stuff with Uber, this would have been before their Series A. Is that correct?
It was right around the time of the Series A.
Okay, got it. Okay, so they've been working on this for
they'd done San Francisco before I met Travis.
Okay, got it.
And then the reason we met was because he came to New York, ran into political problems immediately, and reached out for help, and we got connected, and then it went from there.
Amazing. I actually ran into the exact same problem where I got rejected by 8 taxis in one night the first time I was in Paris. And I was like, come on. Yeah. They actually would tell me that I didn't live in the direction of their home.
As one of I mean, Paris is particularly bad, but generally speaking, the taxi industry, because it never had any real competition.
Yeah, that's true.
Just became a lazy, corrupt, sleazy business. And they didn't care about the customers. They didn't really care about the drivers a lot of the time in terms of all the taxis. Yeah. And so they delivered a really substandard product and service, and Uber was able to really take advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of, how you are, when you went into your first investor role, okay, you're thinking, now I've generated something, I'm comfortable, how can I move forward? How can I invest in other companies that are also just really exciting to me? What were your first kind of obstacles that you faced? What were the first challenges as an investor, as a new investor?
Yeah. Well, the first thing was raising, because every LP says they want a differentiated strategy.
Of course.
And what they really mean is they want exactly what they're already known and comfortable with a tiny twist, right? And it took me a long time to understand, right? Because in politics, it's like you want the media to pay attention to things. You want to talk about how big of a change whatever it is you're doing is. And so you kind of present it in dramatic ways. And then institutional LPs are so conservative that was really the wrong approach. It took me a while to figure that out. It took us almost 2 years to raise our first fund. So that was the biggest challenge by far. The good news was founders and other VCs understood our value proposition really quickly. And so we didn't have the same kind of challenge getting to deals or getting into deals that we had raising money. But the very first campaign we had was FanDuel. So it was the first investment we made. And
Oh, amazing.
I had met them because KKR was their biggest investor.
Okay.
And even before I launched my fund, I had some friends at KKR that said, you know what, we know they're going to run into regulatory issues. You know, you're the Uber guy. Would you mind just talking to them and giving
You're the Uber guy.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah.
Then, you know, we raised our fund. And then the New York Times published an article in October of, I think it was 2016, basically accusing FanDuel and DraftKings of a version of insider trading, claiming that
Oh, right.
employees at one platform were getting information from employees at the other and using
Right,
that.
right. Yeah, that was
Turned
a
out to
big
not
scandal.
turned out to not be true. But of
Mm-hmm.
course, once the New York Times says it's true, no one else really cares.
True.
So all of a sudden, state attorney generals all over the country started sending cease and desist letters to FanDuel and to DraftKings saying, stop operating. And I remember the guy, Christian Genetsky, who's still there. He was their general counsel at FanDuel, who I'd met with, and I liked him. And I sent him an email saying, look, if I were you, I'd be doing these 5 things, right? And he wrote back, when can you start doing them? And I said, well, we got to get a deal done first. And Jordan and I worked out a deal. We invested in sort of a safe and jumped into it, and then had to run campaigns in 16 different states to legalize fantasy sports betting. And luckily it worked. We were able to eventually make it okay everywhere. And then after that, the Supreme Court overturned the ban on states doing sports betting explicitly, and the industry took off from there. Flutter acquired FanDuel, and
Yeah.
the value soared, and we were able to get a really great return for our LPs.
I love this story. So many reasons. First, you're giving a lot of great lessons and a lot of honesty and transparency to people who are starting their own funds and trying to break into venture and being like, how do I do it? I didn't come from this industry. And so you met FanDuel by actually reading about this controversial stuff that's happening. You didn't know them before. You reached out and be like, I want to be in on this. This is how I would do it. And you showed so much value and differentiation as an investor.
That's certainly what we try to do.
Yeah.
You know, and the good other story is Lemonade was our second investment.
Right. I saw that.
And
it's an exited company. Amazing.
Same kind of thing where, so Jordan met Daniel Schreiber. Daniel is the co-founder and CEO of Lemonade.
Mm-hmm.
And Daniel was saying that Jordan, we're really frustrated. We're stuck at the New York State Department of Financial Services. We can't get our license to sell insurance. And unlike, say, Uber, you really can't sell insurance without a license. You'll go to jail. So you kind of have to go through the process. And Jordan called me and said, is there anything you can do? And I said, well, how are they going about it now? And I talked to Daniel. And they were kind of doing it the way that was logical, but not actually smart, which was they had their lawyers working with the regulators, and they were going bottom up. And they were getting totally stymied by the bureaucrats. And the lawyers didn't really know how to handle it politically. And my view was, this is not a legal challenge. This is a political challenge. We have to make the people at the top feel like it's in their political interest to want to do this for the license to get granted. And so we launched the campaign aimed at Andrew Cuomo was then the governor of New York. So the governor, legislature saying, here's why this company would be really great for New York and deliver real political value for you.
Wow.
We were able to make that case to them. And then the governor's office said to the Department of Financial Services, make sure they get their license. And we did. And then from there, we had to go state by state. And it varied in every state, right? So like Florida, we had to pass a bill now known as the Lemonade Law, simply because the model wasn't legal under the current law. In
they have
Texas,
a law named after them? That's so
cool. There's Lemonade Law.
I've never heard of this for a startup before.
Yeah, it was cool. For at least if you're like a really nerdy like me. It was
I know.
Cool. Texas, you know, they love business. That's true to their reputations. I called the governor's chief of staff, and he's like, what time do you want to pick up your license? Great. You know, Pennsylvania, we had to change the reserve requirements and statute because we were a startup and just didn't have the same kind of capital. So did that, and then just kind of kept going. And you know, also because we were just so different than other VCs, and because reporters love talking about politics, especially non-political reporters, we were able to just get a lot of attention. And we ran a really active earned media campaign to just get our name out there as much as possible, because the good news was, as the only firm that does what we do, we didn't have competition. The bad news was no one knew we existed, right? Like how do we tell that? And it wasn't like we had any money for marketing,
Yeah.
right? So how do we tell that story? And so it was just constantly kind of pounding the pavement on earned media. And I eventually started a podcast and writing a column. And I've written a couple of books about this stuff now. And I teach stuff at Columbia Business School and really just use every opportunity to kind of talk about that intersection of tech and regulation and politics. And that's good for deal flow.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting because it seems like you going through so many kind of hurdles, but you're really honing in on what you do best. You're
Yeah.
doubling down on your own strengths and your own knowledge of how the system normally works and showing that I'm providing value in this way. And I think that a lot of people, especially, younger generations that are getting into venture, don't believe that, you know, and it's really hard to kind of absorb in a way if you don't see it in real life or
Yeah. And I would
everyone else
say
looks the same.
totally. So if I were a founder and I was, look, at the moment, founders are just trying to get money. So they're beggars, not choosers. But the market will turn again. So when
Yes,
it
absolutely.
does,
Yeah.
I would say you want investors that really fit into one of two categories. Either they are a brand name, a Sequoia, an Andreessen that will just make everyone else impressed, and therefore that gives you validation and credibility. Plus, they have platforms that might be helpful depending on what you need from them. Or you want much smaller but really differentiated investors like us, but in lots of different fields, who just do one thing, but it's a thing that you're really going to need, and they can actually do that thing. I think what a lot of VCs tell founders is like, because they don't really have either of the two things I just said, is like, oh, I'm a great board member. I can help you hire engineers. I can give you good advice. And you know what? Like, that's kind of nonsense, right? Like, every VC could do that. We still do that also for portfolio companies, apart from the regulatory stuff. So, like, at the end of the day, you need to derive specific value from each specific investor. And if you can't identify what the true value is, they're probably not bringing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's very clear and concise what kind of probably deal flow that you're getting a
Yeah,
lot
for
of
us,
because
it's
it's just
pretty
like,
long.
will this work or not, Bradley? So if you can, would you like to share one or two examples? It could be broad, generalized examples of things you're like, this absolutely won't work. Why would
Yeah,
you ever conceive of this?
sure. I mean, all the time. I remember one time a guy on my team came to me, and I like doing gaming startups. And he said, oh, I met these guys. They're doing their own kind of lottery, but not with the state. And I'm like, dude, that's called the numbers. It's wildly illegal. I can't help. Like, I'm not getting involved in that. That's like what the mafia, literally like what the mafia does.
Oh,
Like,
nice. Okay, so that's who the backer is.
right. It's like, no, we're not going to invest in that. Or sometimes, it's things that like we didn't do the deal, but there was this concept of kitchen sharing. So kind of like ride sharing or home sharing, but like, you're a millennial, Gen Z, you live alone, you make a thing of lasagna, you only need one slice, you put it on a platform, and other Gen Z people come by and buy it. I'm too old for that kind of stuff. But I remember thinking like, okay, this is an interesting concept. I like the founder, but because all food sales in this country are inspected by the Department of Health as they should be, or the
Oh,
FDA,
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
in order to legalize this, you need to create an entirely new regulatory framework, and in every individual city, and they would have needed tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to get through that whole process. And this was, a normal Series A startup with a couple of $1 million. And they, ran out of money before they could get to where they needed to get to be legal. So it might have been a decent business model, but sometimes the regulatory challenge ahead is so much greater than the resources the startups able to bring to the table that it doesn't make sense.
I'm so amazed that like without regulation, you can get to a few hundred million or a few million even at like, end of year revenue because it's like, how'd you get so far?
Right.
How'd you go through all of this?
Yeah, sometimes I am amazed, or I'll meet with a founder, and it's like, and usually for us it's typically Series A, and I'll be like, wow, like I'm sort of like I'm impressed that you either A, just didn't know what you didn't know and didn't get caught, or
Yeah.
B, you were just kind of, you did know it and you were kind of just faking it on your own, and it worked like pretty good. It's going to get, the challenge always is for founders typically speaking, the more you succeed, if you're in a regulated industry, the more attention you attract, especially if you're in an industry that already has entrenched interests and
Yeah.
incumbents. And then oftentimes they will use politics to try to stop you from competing with them. So, I find that typically we're in one of two situations. Either it's a startup that has a new way of doing something that already exists. So if you take
Yeah.
Uber,
Mhm.
Travis didn't invent the idea of paying someone to take you from point A to point B, but he came up with a better way to do it,
Yeah.
right? Once he started succeeding, the taxi industry was like, oh, we don't want this. They used their political muscle to try to stop us. And what we really had was a fight over market share through the guise of regulation. The other half, so that's about, I'd say, half the stuff we do. The other half would be white spaces. So drones, crypto, AI, whatever it is, where the good news is you're not competing with anyone, and that there's no entrenched interest that you're disrupting. So you don't have to worry about them coming after you. The bad news is there's no rules at all. And while that might sound great, the
Yeah.
reality is there's no legitimate multi-billion dollar industry that doesn't have some forms of rules and structure and regulation.
Yeah, true, true. And so, I'm interested to kind of see like where do you see the next big wave of regulations being changed or rules being broken or new things
Yeah,
being created
yeah.
in
I
your
mean,
eyes?
clearly, like everything, the answer is AI. But where I think might be useful for your followers is it's less at the federal level than more at the state level.
Oh,
There were over 200 pieces of legislation introduced this year in state governments about AI regulation, and those can pass. Now, the scary thing is the people who are considering those bills know nothing about AI.
no.
Right? So
I've
they
watched
could
those
be
YouTubes.
right. They could be good bills. They could be bad bills. But you know what? If you're an AI startup in the state of New York or California, whatever, passes a bill regulating your industry, like that's your new reality. So
Yeah.
like you can't just sort of take it for granted or just say, oh, well, not our problem. Most people look to the federal government because when they think of government, they think of Washington. Washington might one day regulate AI, but they are so wildly dysfunctional that the odds of them like doing anything meaningful, like it's a miracle the TikTok bill passed, and like that's because it was literally a foreign adversary using propaganda that every kid had in their pocket, right? Like that's what it takes to get Washington to act on a tech issue. So AI regulation isn't happening anytime soon, but clearly at the state level, municipal level, it is. So that's one obviously really big area right now. And then it really, if you just go industry by industry, it depends, right? So like digital health, we're really big investors in that space because it's highly regulated, it's very big, very screwed up. So there's lots of opportunity to
A
do
lot,
better.
lots of opportunity.
And it's really fragmented. So you can invest in lots of different spaces within the industry, and the TAMs
Right.
are pretty big. So, the catheter industry could be a $12 billion business or whatever it is. So if you have a better way to do it, like that becomes viable, right? That actually is much less contentious because ironically, both parties like it for different reasons, but they both like it. Republicans like digital health because it can provide care to rural areas, have as much access to hospitals and
Hmm.
health. Democrats like it because it can provide care to poor urban areas and residents. So even though they have different political motivations, that's an issue that actually weirdly has bipartisan support. So then you're just working through, the individual regulatory issues around. Like for Roman, it was okay. Zach Raitano, who's the founder and CEO of Roman,
Yeah.
had a obvious but sort of brilliant idea, which was if a man has to go to a doctor and ask for Viagra, a certain number will do it. If you can do it over a video call, more will do it. If you can do it asynchronously over text and not have to have any embarrassing conversation with anybody, like exponentially more will do it. Then the question became like, okay, that's true, but is prescription via text legal? And like,
Right.
no one knew because until Zach, no one tried it, right?
Right.
And we had to kind of go state by state and just figure it out, and we did. So there's a lot in the health space where it's just like, okay, here's this new thing, can it be done? And you're sort of figuring it out, but it's more technical and less ideological. So it totally varies. There are some industries like crypto that are actually mainly regulated on the federal level. So, what we see right now from the SEC in the Biden administration could be very different than what we might see if Trump were to win under a Trump presidency, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some of that stuff becomes much more binary. So, our work really varies from industry to industry, sector to sector, and just level of government to level of government. But most of our work tends to happen more at the municipal and state.
That's really interesting because it's so interesting that like there are VCs that are like, I will fund your dream, and then you're like, I will make it work. It will actually be a reality. And it's just like such an interesting way to go about it, but it's also so necessary to actually build the business and make it run and be sustainable in the long term and change things forever.
We think so. Yeah. I think that we do provide, in my view, a pretty integral service to the industry, to our
Yeah.
portfolio. I keep waiting for people to challenge me and copy our model. I know that keeps me up at night. And
You need
as
somebody with all your years of experience. Like
yeah,
you have to
well,
copy train.
right. The way I fall back asleep, right or wrong, is I kind of say, one, I had decades of doing all these different things in politics and my team as well. Two, I had Uber, which is sort of the best known tech regulatory fight ever, right?
Yeah.
And three, because I got really lucky and I took my fee in Uber and equity, I made a bunch of money that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And then
Hmm.
I reinvested it into doing the venture business.
Hmm.
And so that gave me a certain amount of flexibility, and I just happen to have a really high risk tolerance. So, my hope is that all of that stuff, when combined, is sort of a weird combination, and we'll continue to have the space to ourselves
Yeah.
for a while, but sooner or later, someone else will join us.
Well, I'm really looking forward to, what you get to work on next and what comes across your desk next. So thank you
Cool.
so
Thank
much,
you.
Bradley, for
Yeah,
coming
thanks for
on
having
to an
me.
episode of Unlocking Venture Capital. It was so great to have you.
Yeah, really great to come on. I'd love to talk to you again.